What's up, guys? One of our last videos was talking about reels that you can use for rail rod and fighting these big fish at night. So we're going to go over rods to pair with those reels, and we're going to give you guys some options that are good starter rods or for your more high-end rods. All right, first rod we got here is the PCH by Okuma. Tell us a little bit about this one, Nate.
So this is a composite rod. It's mostly graphite, I believe. Difference between that and like a glass rod, you'll see when we bend on them, but they'll tend to load up a lot faster. You'll see that a lot of the bend tends to come out of this section of the rod, and then it starts to get stiff really quick when you go from here down. Again, you'll kind of see the difference between that and a glass rod when we pull on them.
Yeah, like you said, a little bit on the lower end of the price. Good starter rod. Even a rod like this that's on the lower end of the rail rod spectrum is going to be much better than guys trying to fish something that isn't rated high enough for their reel.
Okay, so just to note about the amount of weight we're using today, guys. Steve mentioned that we do have about 20 pounds in this Calcutta bag here. It's a good number to use to showcase the bend in these rods. A lot of times you're going to have your drag set to about 20 to 30 pounds of drag. And this is about how much those rods will be bending. If your drag is set to 20 pounds, it's going to take 20 pounds of pressure to break it and get line coming off of that reel. And I think this is a pretty fair test.
When we're setting our drags, we usually suggest doing like a quarter to 1/3 of the breaking strength. So let's say this is a 100-pound test or something like that. You could set your drag at like 25 to 33 pounds. So that's why we chose 20 pounds as a baseline here to show you guys. First, we got the Okuma PCH here, and I'm going to show you guys kind of rail rod technique as well. You can see my left hand on the outside of the reel here, underneath my left armpit. And imagine this is a much thinner rail instead of a milk crate. So once we get it in gear and put a little drag here, I'm going to wind down, get my tip close to it. I'm going to squat down with my legs. And you can see I'm getting that lift here of that 20-pound bag.
So as you can see, a lot of the bending is coming from about this top, I would say, third or quarter of the rod. Once you get into here, that's where it really starts to load up into the backbone.
Yeah,
you get into the bottom section, it really shuts off. So obviously you have significantly more bend than you have towards the back end of the rod.
You can see this a little bit of bounce right here, guys. When you have a fish on, that'll be the kick as you turn the head of the fish. All right. Next rod up is our Graftech right here.
This is going to be more of a graphite rod. Most of your bend is going to be coming from the top section, right about from here to here. Less parabolic than the glass, but definitely has the recoil and the lifting power to do big fish. All right. Okay, so this rod really showcases what we're talking about with these composites. Almost all of the bend is coming from about this top third of the rod. Once you get below this eye, this is relatively straight, and you're really getting into heavy backbone. One thing to consider with these composites, especially these graphite rods, is you want to be extra careful not to do what we call high sticking, which is if you put too much angle on that rod, it'll put a little too much pressure on this transition area between the graphites, and it tends to snap right about that point. Biggest difference between that and the glass rods is going to be that big bend. But yeah, you can really see how this one shuts off really fast once you get into about here.
All right, next rod, taking just a little bit of a step up here, the Daiwa Proteus.
Yeah, so Proteus is a new creation from Daiwa. These things haven't been out very long, but they're excellent, excellent quality rods. The recoil and lifting power on these things is phenomenal. This particular model is rated like 80 to unlimited as far as the pound test of the line you can fish. You're going to have a tough time maxing out this rod, even with the biggest of our local fish here. Okay, so again, you guys, composite rod, most of your bend is coming from the top section here. Starts to get really stiff. Though this rod does have excellent recoil for a graphite rod, I'm sure you can probably feel a lot of that lifting power on your end.
Yeah, this is a lot easier to lift actually than the last two.
Definitely, and you can see when that fish pulls, you get in a little bounce and it wants to recoil and pull itself up right away. It doesn't just kind of sit under that weight and stay down. Fantastic rod.
Yeah, that was a huge difference from the first two in my opinion, guys.
Definitely. One thing to note on these things is they do skip the base wrap, so there is no layer of thread underneath the guides. Remains to be seen if that's something that affects the longevity of this rod. But other than that, they put fantastic components. You got exhaust wrap up here, and this is definitely a rod that would take a beating, catch a big fish.
This feels like a great starter rod for me. I'm going to start suggesting this to guys after this. Now we got the Seeker OSP 1x3.
Recoil on these things is next to none. It's phenomenal. The lifting power is amazing. You manage to keep a little softer tip with that glass up in this region. And you'll notice when we bend on it, the bend is going to be a lot more parabolic. So you're going to get your bend from the tip all the way about to your second guide on the rod. Then you really start to get into the meat of it when you hit the handle. But a little bit different from these guys. This one will load up a little bit slower and tend to put the curve over the whole length of the rod. Awesome. Okay, so the recoil on this rod is phenomenal. You can see the bend is going almost down to the second or third guide here, pretty much down to the second guide. Once you get down below this section, you got a ton of backbone that's going to make this thing pull on really big fish. Likewise, when you get that bounce on it, see how it wants to return to its position really quickly? It doesn't stay and sag. It wants to lift that weight back up. So recoil on this rod is phenomenal.
Yeah, and you can feel the difference from the first couple that we tested out here. If you guys are behind the rod, just when you push down, it's a little bit less effort, a little bit easier on the angler. Here's a United Composites right here. This is the Invictus, and this is a longer rod than the other ones, and that's kind of something that I like for fishing on a sport boat. That extra few inches can help you keep a fish out of the props and out of the rudder. This is a little bit beefier rod than the other ones. You can see just by looking at it, just a little bit thicker and heavier than those guys that we've showcased thus far. All right, we're gonna wind her down, set the drag a little heavier here, and get our lift off.
Okay, so as you guys can see, this is a very stiff rod. Recoil on this thing is amazing. It's probably one of the heavier rods that we've compared today. I think this one's rated up to about 200 pounds. But again, you get a pretty even bend from the front to about the second eye. The fact that it's not bending a ton because it's a beast of a rod is one thing, but the amount that it's bending from here to here is pretty consistent.
Yeah, enough bend that it's keeping pressure on a fish, where like a broomstick that you'll call it has no bend to keep that hook tight. This has got a bend and it's still kicking, right?
So, and same thing, yeah, you can see when I'm pulling down on this thing, it's hardly staying in the sag position at all. It's lifting it right back up to that original point, and it's staying there. This is one of my personal favorites. I love these rods.
Now we're taking another step up. We got the Super Seeker here, and this is what I personally fish and love it. Killed a lot of big bluefin on these.
Yeah, pretty much the cream of the crop as far as Seekers line. We'll show you when we bend on them. The parabolic bend on these things is amazing. You really see that thing load up from the tip to the base of the rod. You're not having, the top section of the rod do all the work for you and just a broomstick on the bottom.
Yeah. And what a lot of people get caught up in when they hear the word parabolic is they think of a rod that's going to bend all the way. Not only do you want that, you want a rod that'll bend and kick. So it's going to bend when you're winding on it, right, to keep that pressure on the fish. It doesn't just stay straight. It's not too stiff for the line test you're using. But it still is going to bend and kick. Some of these rods that are really parabolic will bend and they just stay down and you never get that kick, forcing the angler to have to lift instead of being able to use the rail.
Yeah, the recoil of the rod, how much that rod is actually doing the lifting for you, is probably the most important measuring factor in these things.
That can kill an angler. It can make a fight last much longer than they want it to, and it can use your backup instead of using the rail.
Okay, actually this thing bends pretty beautifully for such a heavy rod. This thing's rated 100 to 200, 3x5. Again, you can see very parabolic bend to about the second guide here. After that, it really starts to shut off. Mm-hmm. The lifting power on these is next to none. I mean, it's as good as the OSP, but you can see it wants to lift that 20 pounds right back to its original location and keep it there. It doesn't bounce too much.
Yeah, and when you're pulling on the tip there, I'm actually not feeling as much because the bend is absorbing a lot of it versus some of the other rods where it's just getting a little bit of shock off the angler. All right, so now this is an H&M Landing rental. This is a Rainshadow. What do you got for me, Nate?
So this is also a composite rod. It does have some glass towards the top end, so it's actually built a little bit more like those Seekers or United Composites. It's going to bend pretty similarly in that way that you'll see from about the third rod guide down rather to about the tip. It's going to bend very parabolically. Once you get below that, you really start to lay into the meat of it, into the bottom end of that rod.
So how much are these to rent?
So these things, depending on the length of your trip, you'd be looking at anywhere from about, I want to say $80 to about $150. That's rod, reel, and line, and depends, like I said. If you're on an overnight trip, you're probably looking closer to that 80 mark. If you're on like a 2-3 plus day, you're probably looking closer to that 100, 150 mark.
So yeah, if you guys don't have your own railrod set up yet, this is something where you guys can test it out and figure out what you want to feel for and what you want to check out before you make your own purchase.
Definitely, yeah, and it's quite an investment to jump into a big rail setup like this. I think people are taken by surprise oftentimes when they're comparing prices of this stuff. You're looking at these reels. Some of the ones we compared last week, we were looking at $300 to $600 or $700. These rods that we have laid out in front
Same
of us,
thing,
yeah,
yeah.
similar range from about 300 to about 700. So it gets pricey once you look at putting line on that reel and everything. It's definitely a lot cheaper to rent, especially if you're a couple times a year kind of guy. Okay, killer. So this is one, and you can see is a composite, like we said. Most of the glass is up in the tip. So you can actually see where the material blends on this blank is right about here between these two guides. Almost all of the bending is coming in this glass section here. Once you hit the graphite section on the bottom, mega, mega backbone.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, we're talking about 80 to 150 bucks to rent one of these versus buying your setup. That's including the big reel. So guys that want to test something out and get their first rail rod for their first big tuna, good option.
Definitely. And speaking of options, might as well mention that there are definitely lots and lots of rods that we did not cover today. Between all the manufacturers and the technology available today, there's probably hundreds of rods, if not more, in this price and size range that would work for the fishing we're doing.
Yeah. So if you guys have any other rods that you want us to like look at for a future video or something like that, leave it in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe if you guys want to see more fishing content. Thank you guys for viewing.